The Molten Fists are a semi-codex-compliant successor of Rogel Dawn through the Crimson Fists, founded during the ill-fated 21st founding from the most versatile of the Crimson Fist gene seed. They are not lucky enough to escape the legacy of their founding, and as such suffer from a genetic flaw called the internal flame. This gives them an incredible tolerance to flame and heat that parallels to the salamanders, but at the cost of experiencing a constant burning pain throughout their body. This flaw has given rise to the chapter's extensive use of melter and flame weaponry, as well as their frequent meditations. They hail from the volcanic death world of Fortier too, but mostly use their sole battle barge, the Crown of Ren, as their fortress ministry for almost all recruiting and military purposes. The Molten Fists were founded in the opening years of the 36th millennium from the most versatile and tactically flexible inheritors of the Crimson Fist gene seed. Though the 21st founding occurred with the intent to perfect the Astartes gene seed, it was a catastrophic failure and left many of its chapters with crippling gene flaws. The Molten Fists were no exception, and within months of their founding, a significant flaw had already emerged from within their ranks. Having been tasked with the defense of the Segmentum Obscurus, the fleet of the Molten Fists traveled into its heart. They quickly took the volcanic death world of Fortier II as their homeworld, establishing themselves as the planet's and system's rulers. During their initial and in-depth exploration of the world, they located an ancient structure beneath a large chain of volcanoes on the edge of the region dubbed the Death Continent by the natives of Fortier, an area of incredibly high tectonic and volcanic activity with no permanent inhabitants. The structure appeared to be of imperial origin, but much of the technology and designs inside of it had not been seen or used since the days of the Horus Heresy. Farador Hallius, the chaptermaster at the time, ordered the forces of the Fifth Company to explore and potentially pacify the vast expanse of tunnels and caverns inside the structure. Upon entering the complex, they were immediately assaulted by a horde of hostile servitors and Skitari that were awoken by their entry. Though the mechanical horde was driven off with ease, the Astartes were surprised to find no sign of chaotic corruption. The Fifth Company would continue to purge the complex for almost a year, constantly fighting off Mechanicus forces whose machine spirits had been degraded by age. Eventually, they would come across a large room more ornately decorated than any the cohort had come across before. The contents of the room surprised even the stoic and emotionless Space Marines. Before them stood 20 suits of power armor that none of the company could identify. The Chief Tech Marine, upon studying one closely, declared that the suits were of more advanced design than even the Mark 8 plate worn by many of their sergeants. Upon further analysis of the chamber, a dormant machine spirit was reactivated. This one, however, was not aggressive, retaining some semblance of sanity that the others had long since lost. In the brief time between the spirit's awakening and its death, the Tech Marines of the Molten Fists were able to glean the names of the mysterious suits from its database, the Molten Warrior suits. Ever vigilant for corruption, the chaptermaster ordered them to be checked for the taint of chaos and then stored away to be used in the chapter's time of greatest need. Using the information recovered from the machine spirit, the Molten Warrior suits were identified as belonging to 11 distinct patterns. 10 of the suits had been named the Crusade pattern armor. Each of these had the same base armor, which bore resemblance to Mark IV armor, though were taller and bulkier, but each individual suit of armor had a different weapon loadout. The most powerful of the remaining 10 was identified as the Emperor pattern, and the other 9 were named after those Primarchs that remained loyal to the Emperor. Though each suit varied in size, weaponry and strength, they all shared one trait: the ability to manifest psychic powers even if the wearer was not a psyker. The Molten Warrior suits would become a matter of great concern and debate for the rest of the history of the Molten Fists, and many Mechanicus and Inquisitorial representatives would come close to exchanging blows with the chapter, declaring them borderline heretical for refusing to hand the suits over or submit them to inspection. This so-called prosecution of the Molten Fists would be a seemingly never-ending debate between various factions of the Inquisition and Mechanicus. Fabricator General Zagreus Kane would famously remark, "These suits, they boost psychic power, you say? I say heresy. I shall notify the Inquisition of this foul action at once and have this chapter abolished." Despite this, the Molten Fists still have not been declared heretics. Until 999 M41, the chapter's history was relatively quiet and unstoried, with only 2 conflicts of note occurring. A vicious crusade against the Empire of the Severed that claimed the life of Farador Helios, and an event on which the Fourth Company protected a Forge world from an Orc war, and were gifted a master-crafted pair of Power Fists by the Forge's artificers. These would be called the Aerith Fists, in reference to the chapter master at the time, and were permanently coated in flame, capable of melting down almost any substance. It was during this intermediary time that 2 extra companies emerged as part of the chapter's organization in order to aid with the tactical flexibility for which they were founded. In 999 M41, shortly after the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum, an event occurred that would have a massive impact on the Molten Fists. It would come to be known as the Battle of Fortier. A splinter of High Fleet Jormungandr, brought across the galaxy by a series of freak warp storms, was drawn towards the Fortier system. The splinter fleet would become known as Nidhogg, and would become infamous in the months preceding the battle for the formidable mutations in its bioform's bore and its unique attack pattern. The Battle of Fortier began with the advanced tendrils of Nidhogg triggering Genestealer occult insurrections in the moons of Saturnine Minor and Major, the 2 outer gas giants in the Fortier system. This alerted the chapter to the impending arrival of the Tyranids, and they called for help from the surrounding systems. However, only 2 regiments of the Imperial Guard were able to arrive before the shadow in the warp rendered warp travel all but impossible. The 4th, 6th and 7th companies were deployed to the gas giants and were purging the Genestealers there with bolt and flame when the Nidhogg arrived. Caught off guard by the Hive Fleet's sudden arrival, they were all but wiped out in a matter of days. Their sacrifice bought time for those civilians, deemed uncorrupted, to retreat to the core of the system, Fortier 2, where they took shelter inside the Fortress Ministry, Calasis. It was a popular fable within the ranks of the Molten Fists that Calasis' location within the mountain range on the edge of the Death Continent and the incredible armament that could be mobilized within it made it impenetrable. However, with the losses suffered at the system's rim, the monastery was severely undermanned. A month after the battle at the rim, Nidhogg made landfall. For the first weeks of the invasion, the Astartes would incinerate the ground-based swarms with large walls of flamer and melter weapons. Fortunately for the defenders, the tectonic nature of Fortier rendered many of the burrowing bioforms useless, giving the Astartes a much-needed respite. However, as the battle raged on, larger and more powerful bioforms would be spawned by the hive mind. The Sons of Dawn were pushed back from the edges of Calasis, having to put parts of the monastery into full lockdown to prevent tyrannic swarms encircling the defenders. Eventually, the main door of Calasis would be breached, forcing the Marines into violent close combat with the Xenos. Just as it seemed the Molten Fists would be killed, their salvation arrived in a hail of bolter fire and promethium. The Indomitus Crusade had arrived, and with it forces of the Death Watch, Crimson Fists, and new Primaris element of the Molten Fists. With a renewed burst of fury, the Molten Fists struck out from Calasis, and in a grueling year-long campaign, purged the planet of the Xenos. Despite their salvation, Chapter Master Vulkus would keep the chapter in a period of relative inactivity for 50 years to allow them to reach anywhere near their former numbers. However, once they had returned to strength, they returned to the chaos of the galaxy and Imperium with a new hatred for the Tyranid threat. The chapter roughly follows the Codex Astartes, but deviates in multiple ways. They maintain 12 companies with an extra battle company and battle line support company to aid their tactical flexibility. Due to the nature of the Molten Fists gene flow, they also have an unusually high number of chaplains, which are used to assist other Marines in meditation and controlling the internal flame. The first company remains the veteran company and has an elite group called the Fire Fists formed out of its members. The Fire Fists are not only the honor guard of the chapter master, but act as his closest advisors, even more so than the captains. They are the ones gifted with the honor of wearing the Crusade pattern Molten Warrior suits. The Fire Fists also act as extensions of the chapter master's will on the battlefield, and are led by the chapter's champion. The 2nd through 6th companies are battle companies, and the ones which most commonly use the specialized Molten Warrior suits. Notably, most of the Third Company is currently engaged in a purification crusade against the remnants of High Fleet Nidhogg that went shattered in the purging of Fortier II. The 7th, 8th and 9th Companies are battle line reserve companies and are used to back up the majority of engagements. The battle line reserve companies were created in greater quantities than the Codex Astartes suggested to allow the chapter to better fulfill their goal of defeating a vast quantity of different threats. The 10th Company is an assault reserve company and the 11th is the Devastator reserve company. The 12th Company is the Scout and Vanguard Company and is larger than in most other chapters. This stems from the belief that Scouts were incredibly flexible tactically and were able to fulfill lots of roles that an ordinary Marine could not. The Molten Fists used to wield a unique squad type that fell in the fire support category called the Hellfire Squad. These were early versions of non-Primaris Hellblaster squads which were equipped with a range of melter and flame weaponry and were deployed to destroy heavily fortified and armored enemy structures and units. With the introduction of Primaris Marines, the Hellfire squads faded, instead becoming optional loadouts for tactical squads. Tech Marines of the chapter have also begun to outfit several Hellblaster squads with melter guns to replace these old squads, but this is not widely used. The Molten Fists have an incredible emphasis on tactical flexibility and therefore use a high number of tactical Marines compared to other chapters. They also use lots of melter and flamer weaponry as a byproduct of their gene flaw. Overall, the Molten Fists prefer to take long-range engagements, making use of their ranged weaponry on their tactical squads to great effect. Their main doctrine uses the principle of a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and when in battle will apply overwhelming levels of firepower to the weakest area of an enemy defense, causing the rest to crumble. Fortier II was claimed as the Molten Fists' homeworld shortly after their founding. It is classified by the Administratum as a feral death world, and its high levels of volcanic and tectonic activity mean that any permanent settlement is near impossible, except for on the relatively stable Olkia continent. The vast majority of Fortier II's surface is covered in volcanoes and lava flows, but despite this, there's a wide variety of fauna present on its surface, much of it incredibly hardy and dangerous. The Fortress Monastery of the Molten Fists is located inside a mountain range on the edge of the Death Continent atop the ancient structure that once housed the Molten Warrior battle plates. It is divided up to 12 sections around a central cylinder. Each section is dedicated to one of the chapter's 12 companies and houses the company's relics and vehicles, as well as records of its deeds and those of its marines. The central column is dedicated to worship halls and the centers of the chapter's librarians, chaplaincy, armory, and apothecarian. Formerly, prior to the invasion of Nidhogg, when recruiting new marines, contests of strength and skill would be held on each moon and settlement, and the winner of each of these contests is put into training on Fortier II. The survivors of this intensive training then graduate into scouts and have their gene seed implanted into them. When a scout graduated into a full marine, they underwent a ceremony where they must survive for a year on the Death Continent. Their actions during this year can impact the rest of their career as a marine and can earn them much respect among their fellow marines. For example, the 3rd Company Interceptor Squad, the Dragon Hunters, only accept those who killed a fire drake during their trial. To become a veteran, marines must do a similar trial, but only for 6 months. Currently, many of the same trials are held on Fortier II, but the fleet visits the surrounding systems and holds similar trials on an annual basis to make up for the low population in the Fortier system. Around 60% of those recruited survive the hard training to become one of the Molten Fists Astartes. The Molten Fists follow a slightly modified version of the Imperial cult, believing in the Emperor's godhood and that he watches their every move. They compare their suffering from the eternal flame to his constant pain on the Golden Throne, but recognize that his is infinitely more severe. Their pain is used in worship to the Emperor. Originally, in the time since its founding, the Molten Fists had little to do with the Death Watch and only sent their most disgraced members to serve in it. Due to the Death Watch's contribution to the relief force sent to Fortier II, the chapter has become considerably more active within the Death Watch, sending many more members to serve the Long Watch. These members are also frequently more elite than before, often originating from the chapter's 1st Company. The most notable of these is Niris Markov, the Sergeant of Kill Team Raptor. His list of honors rivals that of many of the captains of the Molten Fists, and he has served in the Death Watch for over 150 years. He is known for his strategic brilliance, but this is undermined by his arrogance that has led to his downfall in many occasions. The internal flame is a gene flaw that manifested due to their founding in the 21st Cursed Founding. It gives a chapter an extreme resistance to heat and fire, to the extent that to become a full Marine, scouts must submerge themselves in a lava flow. There have also been instances of Marines surviving an overloaded plasma gun detonating. This comes at the cost of experiencing a constant burning pain all across their body. This pain can be managed through meditation, and as such, most Marines spend the vast majority of their time, when not on deployment, meditating under the guidance of the chapter's many chaplains. In addition to a superhuman grasp of tactics, a lieutenant, company master of veterans, or veterans' grasp over this pain must be exceptional in order for him to ascend to that role. With this gene flaw aside, the chapter's gene seed is stable, but suffers from an inactive Bletchley's gland and Susan membrane like all successors of Dawn. It is not unheard of, however, for initiates to die when the gene seed is implanted due to the shock of the sudden pain. The Molten Fists maintains close relations with several Astartes chapters in the local area, as well as several regiments of the Astra Militarum. They are also willing to work with any Imperium force. However, due to the chapter's possession of the Molten Warrior suits and their refusal to hand them over, both the Inquisition and the Adeptus Mechanicus heavily dislike the Molten Fists. Although this has never come to conflict between the two, the chapter's increased use of the suits in recent times has only served to further increase the tension.